Good evening and good morning to our participants across time zones, and thank you for joining us for this panel discussion. I'm Asim Sood from Temasek, and I will be the moderator for this panel. Our topic for today is employers as educators. With technologies and business models rapidly evolving, all organizations are experiencing a step change in the workplace skills required to stay relevant and in how to provide the right career growth opportunities for their employees. Trends such as growing digitization and automation are playing a significant role in evolving the workplace, with estimates that more than 100 million workers globally will need to shift their role or occupation within the next decade, and that automation will free up to a third of the time for office workers. From an employer standpoint, recent surveys have indicated that more than 90% of C-level executives are expecting employees to retrain and learn new skills on the job, and more than 60% of executives are still figuring out how to efficiently develop their workforce in an increasingly digital economy. So the topic for today has certainly become important and critical, with COVID only having accelerated these trends. We're fortunate to have our 5 panel members here for this discussion. Let me give a quick introduction for our panel who can give us a background of their roles and organizations. For today's discussion, we have Kat Kennedy, President and Chief Experience Officer at Degree, Candace, Thille, Director of Learning Science and Engineering at Amazon, Rebecca Scales, who's responsible for Engineering, Learning and Development at Expedia, Josh Nestor, Managing Director at Seek, and Julia Stiglitz, Partner at GSV Ventures. Would you all mind giving an introduction for yourselves, maybe starting with Kat?
Yeah, happy to. It's so good to be here with all of you today. As introduced, I'm Kat at Degree. We are a platform that focuses on upskilling, and how we do that is inside the enterprise, connecting everything that organizations do to learn and making sure that it's through the lens of skill and applying that to work to be done in all of its many shapes and forms. So very much looking forward to the conversation today.
Candace, do you mind going next?
Great. Hi, I'm Candace Thille. I'm the Director of Learning Science at Amazon. And I was previously, before coming to Amazon, a professor at Stanford University, where my area of research is human learning, and particularly the intersection of human learning and machine learning. And I came to Amazon with a single mission, which is to innovate and scale workplace learning for Amazon.
Rebecca?
Hi, I'm Rebecca Scales, learning architect at Expedia. We are a travel technology company. And so we are focused, I personally am focused on engineering, upskilling and training at our company, anything from early talent all the way to our veteran engineers, focusing on how they need the content and when they need the content. So I'm looking forward to the discussion as well. And thank you very much for attending.
Josh.
Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Nestor, the MD for Education at Seek. Seek is a global online careers company, and our mission is to help people live more productive and fulfilling working lives and to help organizations succeed. And the key to doing that is to deliver both employability outcomes in relation to their job searching activities, as well as in relation to their education. We are investors in some pretty significant education platforms, including Coursera and FutureLearn. And a lot of the work that we're doing there is trying to bring higher education and industry-based education closer together to make sure that we are meeting the requirements of both learners individually as well as enterprises to ensure that people are employable and that employers are having their talent needs met.
Everyone, it's great to be here. My name is Julia Stiglitz, and I'm a partner at GSV Ventures. We invest across the spectrum, the education spectrum, from, we say, pre-K to gray, with workforce development being a really important part of our investment thesis. I previously was at Coursera, where I was one of the first employees and started and scaled the enterprise business, which worked with governments, organizations, and companies to upskill their workforce.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, everybody, and it's great to have you here. So to start the discussion, we've all seen and felt the necessity of continuous upskilling in employee education. I wanted to ask, how have you all seen the need and commitment towards employee upskilling evolve over the past few years? And maybe to start with Kat and Julia, who've interacted with a wide set of organizations who are trying to answer the question as to how to address employee education.
I would say the change was a lot of exceptional people across the globe inside great organizations have been thinking about this for a long time. They had the spotlight shown upon those conversations as the pandemic came into the equation, because behind the need to upskill, behind that need is agility. How quickly can we transform people in order to accomplish the needs of the business? And that's really the largest change that I've seen most recently in the past 12 to 18 months, especially the past 12, given the global pandemic, is that recognition. Work is going to change. The needs are going to change constantly. How good are organizations at addressing that as quickly as the change happens? And so that has just expedited conversations across the board, making sure that we're equipping these global organizations to enact those changes quickly.
Yeah, so I think even pre-COVID, I saw significant change among organizations where learning was shifting from being something that was a little bit of a silo to being something that was really part of a company's business strategy. And that was a major shift where you saw CEOs of AT&T and large Fortune 100 companies talking about their learning needs and their learning strategies, and that's very significant. And with that comes a willingness to sort of invest in transferable skills. So as opposed to earlier, companies might have been afraid of investing in skills that would make their employees better employable somewhere else. Now they see it as actually a business necessity, that the only way that they're going to compete is if they give their employees these skills that are transferable skills. The change that I see with COVID is this sort of just rapid change to moving online. We've all been forced to, and that's been in the learning space as well, where companies are really quickly moving all of their learning experiences to an online learning experience. And then the other shift that's happened is, while these were pre-COVID trends, the urgency of them is really post-COVID. So I saw one survey from McKinsey that said 2/3 of CEOs say that they're accelerating their automation and adoption of artificial intelligence post-COVID. And with that comes a whole learning agenda. So those are some of the things that I'm seeing.
Got it. And I think this is one of the points which has come out, both trends which existed prior to COVID but have been accelerated by COVID, especially the impact of technology and the pandemic has been disproportionate towards lower wage workers. And I think one of the questions which sort of comes out of this is, can digital learning and upskilling these employees help combat that? I think in one of our earlier discussions, Rebecca and Candace, you both mentioned sort of initiatives helping folks transition from non-technical roles into technical roles within organizations. So just be curious as to how both the organizations are approaching this, what the thought process behind this is, and whether it's been an easy and achievable sort of target, or does it feel like it's a harder one? I'd just be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Go first.
Okay, great. So at Expedia, we do have a lot of technical staff, obviously, and we have a lot of non-technical staff. What we have found is that making that lateral move within the company from a non-technical to a technical can obviously be very daunting. So we started some initiatives around the company to allow Expedians to teach Expedians. So we started something called the Expedia Code Academy back in 2015, where we had developers teaching non-technical staff how to code. That really morphed. We had another initiative within Verbo, that VRBO, where we had an engineer upskilling our folks internally. And then we've morphed into kind of this, we don't just want non-technical staff to learn technical skills, but we'd also like our technical folks to learn some of what we would consider the softer skills, which I think are just as important. And that's communication, the ability to teach. And so then we started the Instructor Academy, so that we were teaching our engineers how to teach. So we're doing a lot of upskilling inside. We now have what's called, everything is kind of morphed together into what we're calling the Platform Academy, which is now still allowing people to within the company to teach each other, and then expanding with other, supplementals, things like, a Cloud Guru and other vendors that are providing some excellent content for us. So within our company itself, it is definitely possible to do it, but leadership has to be on board. They have to see the value in it. And we absolutely at Expedia see the value in upskilling our own people. They know the business. They have a passion for travel, which is what we love to see. And they also have a passion for that technology and making it excellent. Things like artificial intelligence and all that is always at the top of our mind and upskilling people. So I've just seen a huge upsurge in the company really wanting and focusing on that upskilling. So we have a lot of initiatives happening right now that's pretty exciting to see the growth.
Right. So yes, obviously at Amazon, having the opportunity to go from a non-technical role to a technical role is something that we've always supported Amazonians, just like you talk about Expedians, to be able to do. And the mechanisms we've historically used for that have been pretty traditional. Amazon Technical Academy, which was really focused primarily on fulfillment center workers or other non-technical roles that wanted to become software development engineers. And it was an intensive, labor-intensive program, but a real commitment to support Amazonians who wanted to make that transition. Things like our internal machine learning university, which focuses on helping everyone at Amazon be able to upskill in some of the critical skills around machine learning, whether you're already technical or not. However, what we note is that there are 1.3 million people that work at Amazon, and we hire about 357 people a day. And we're constantly innovating on our core business processes. So the knowledge that people need to develop to keep raising the bar for our customers is we can't depend on traditional mechanisms for doing that. So what I mean by traditional mechanisms are instructor-led training, apprenticeship models, or even sort of hands off the wheel, find your content e-learning. Those mechanisms don't scale. And so what do? We do what Amazon has always done. We think about knowledge and capability development, not as training or learning, but as a core business process. And how can we instrument that core business process to collect real-time data about how effective that process is, to give and model those data to give feedback to the different human actors in the system, whether that's giving feedback to the learner as they're in their learning process, so they can know these are the skills I'm trying to develop, this is how well I'm making traction towards those skills, here's some opportunities of things that, since I've gotten to know you as a learner so much better, that might be the best support for you right now to help you move from here to there. For the people that are creating all the learning assets, to be able to collect the data around the learners interacting with those assets and model those across different feature dimensions to let the learning designer know, well, this thing seems to work really well for supporting these kind of people in this kind of context to learn this thing. But actually, if you're trying to support this population in this context, you might need to shift the type of learning activity that you're giving that person. And then of course, feedback to instructors, because we do still do mentor or instructor supported training. But imagine the insight you could get before you walk into a class or before you try and help an individual mentee. If you have real insight into how they're learning and how they're developing, where they're struggling to achieve whatever their learning goal is, then you can spend that time much more effectively to support them. And then the last feedback loop, which is a big part of the reason I came to Amazon, is feedback to the science of learning. So we can design our learning environments, not just putting what we do in classroom on the web and making it accessible, but actually use what we know from decades of research about human learning to try and design learning environments that are going to have the highest probability of supporting someone to learn something, but then collect that evidence and feed it back. And so it's like doing thousands of experiments every day to both make the learning experience better and better, but also to contribute to our fundamental understanding of human learning so that everyone can be making more and more effective.
Got it. And that's certainly fascinating. I did want to ask you as to, when you think about setting up some of the mechanism of delivery of learning and, trying to figure out as to what works best, how transportable and applicable has that been across, whether it be different roles, whether it be different geographies and different cultures, or does it feel like there is a personalized solution which would be catering to each specific role or group, or does it feel like there is there are larger learnings which would be applicable to the 1.3 million people who are at Amazon?
Yeah, both. I mean, part of it is the science of learning, which is kind of a young science, if we're all really honest. It's not like physics. It's not like we know if you do this, this will happen. And it's also not a mechanistic science. It's a complex science. And learning is a complex process that has emergent properties. So you can't really try and do, in some ways, you can't do experimentation in the same way where you try and hold all the variables constant to try and get a clear causal chain that will always hold. Because in a new context, that causal mechanism will shift. So you really have to move more towards a process of adaptive management in both understanding and developing principles of human learning, as well as in refining your learning experiences. So I guess, I don't know if I answered your question. Yes, I mean, there are things that we can test from the science of learning, like, but it's not what works best. That's not really the question. It's more the question of, for this learner, under this condition, trying to learn this thing, what's the highest probability of the best thing to give them next? So it's not so much what works best, but under what conditions can you make the best assessment of what might work best? Like, when do you give someone a lecture versus when do you give them a problem to solve versus when do you give them a worked example versus when do you give them contrasting cases and have them try and infer the underlying principles supporting those cases. So those are all, I mean, if you think about instructional differentiation, which is what we're talking about, there are essentially thousands of decisions that an instructor would have to make a minute to really pick the right instructional thing to do for that learner at that point in time. So what we're really trying to look at is, can we identify the features about the learner, the features about the thing being learned, and the features about the content and how those things interact, and give the right information to the right person, whether that's the learner, the instructor, the course designer, to help them make the best, most principled instructional differentiation decision at that point.
Got it. And I also wanted to ask both Josh and Kat, just on a similar note, when you guys think about and cover sort of learning across different geographies and across different customers and different clients, there are some themes which I think Kat you mentioned in the beginning. There are some themes like automation, and there are some themes like everything moving more online, which are a little bit more globally pervasive today. So I wanted to check with you guys whether you felt that there's been some conversations which feel like are more globally relevant today, or if the playing ground which you guys were working on, it feels like there's common needs and common desires for people across different geographies, or is that always been the case? And I was just curious whether it's accelerated by COVID, or it feels like the problems which people are facing are a little bit more common today.
Oh, thank you, Kat. Look, absolutely, there's some universal elements. I think a lot of the skill sets and the disciplines that need to be learned are universal. I mean, technology is essentially global, and it's having a global impact. And many of the learning needs are driven by the impact of technology on different industries, both the technology itself and the implications that it has for certain industries. Having said that, not all learners are equal. I mean, as Candace said, even there's huge differences between two individual learners. And so when you're talking about people who have grown up in different cultural contexts, in different education systems, the needs and the differences become very complex. And one of the things that I might sort of point to is a lot of the remedial work that needs to be, the foundations that need to be put in place when you're talking about geographies where maybe people don't have a good baseline of mathematics or science or other foundations of learning, because that wasn't instilled through the education system as they were growing up, and that's an enormous challenge when where you actually need to start to look at education and start to go up the chain a little bit, and that is certainly a challenge. Then you need to look at the context in which they're learning. There's certain cultural biases towards or against online learning. There's clearly differences in terms of the case studies that would be relevant for a learner in one geography versus another. And there's also just barriers that people face in terms of the technology, internet bandwidth. How wide is the pipe through which you're consuming the learning? Do you need the ability to download the learning offline, online through the Wi-Fi connection while you're at work, but then consume it on the bus on the way home? So these are very real challenges and barriers that stand in the way, but they're also significant opportunities if you can solve them. And certainly online does provide a great leveler in the sense that it's extremely scalable, it's extremely affordable, it can be ubiquitously available. The challenge is just to make that learning available to the right learner at the right time in the right mode. And what I'd add is, the motivation comes from that immediate need being met. And if that need is purely about compliance, that tends to be more driven by the organisation, but not from the individual. It's not an innate driver. But if you can make that meet the learning need in terms of the person's intrinsic motivations, what they want to learn, to advance their career, to make their career more defensible, and to improve the prospects for their family, then you can absolutely drive very, very high levels of engagement. And in that context, the learners have the motivation and essentially then the completion rates and things can be off the scale in many of these more growth market contexts because the drivers are just so strong.
Yeah, he said it perfectly. What we see getting to work with the organizations that we do at a global perspective for the business, the problems all look very similar. How agile can we be? How are we going to take advantage of and also cope with the face of automation? And what does that mean for our people? But then when we get to the level of the people, it's personal. It is about them. As Josh articulated, what is their trajectory, whether inside of the company or over their lifelong career, and how does this moment impact that individual in that wider context? So I think, yes, we need to take into account that a lot of the problems facing organizations look very similar, but how that plays out for the individual at scale, you need to take into account cultures and internet bandwidth and localization needs, right? Because truly to serve them, it's about them as a person and how we can get them to the next step. And I would say, to the question of, has the pandemic forced any of this? Yes, because now it's front and center. What happens if we assume too much at the business level and we don't fully appreciate what's happening for that person on the other side of it? And it has forced a recognition of those people and making sure that we can solve for them when the world moves very quickly.
Got it. And I think both of your remarks kind of pointed me to or reminded me and jogged my memory about one of the points we discussed earlier around the motivation of learners sort of being at the peak when the need is acute and when there's a time for them to learn. And I think one of the things, Rebecca, in our prior discussion, you'd mentioned is the work you guys are doing to stay ahead of identifying what capabilities you need to develop within employees. And then Expedia recently developing a skills framework to try and address that as well and stay ahead of the curve. It'd be just great to hear, I guess, your thoughts and the thinking which went behind that skills framework.
Right. So what we did was we were trying to determine a way to identify the effectiveness of our training programs when people need it. And so in doing that, as most everyone knows, to be able to gauge the effectiveness of training, it's very difficult to do. Oftentimes we do surveys, we do NPS scores, things like that. And that's the only data that we really gather. And so trying to figure out a way to measure that, but also give people kind of a roadmap of what we expected them to be able to do in their roles, right? So most of last year, we spent working with our SMEs, our subject matter experts in the different areas, like different engineers, data engineering, even data scientists, data analytics, software engineers, and so forth. And we met with all of these different groups and came up with a list of skills that we think are the most important for those roles at Expedia, and then determined from that, not just the list of skills, but the levels of those skills. So those of you who are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, we kind of use that as kind of a foundation for thinking about what is higher level thinking on these skills. And so now we have an opportunity to send this off to our employees where they can do a self-evaluation. We're asking that they do it on themselves. This is a very personal thing. And then as they go through the evaluation, they see where their skills are lacking. They now have a path to be able to choose what learning they choose next. And this is where the kind of that intrinsic motivation comes from, right? So although we're giving them a tool, we're saying now, what do you want to work on? And then of course, managers can work with them if they choose to. Managers can work with them and say, yeah, let's provide you a few more learning opportunities. And they come to our team and they ask those things. So the skills framework is giving us something that we've never had before to the level that we really need. So now if I know that I have a group of say 20 engineers or 200 engineers who are at the beginning level of a skill and they need to be at the proficient level, guess what? We can build a learning opportunity for them, whether it is online, whether it's live, whatever the case may be. We can now really determine what that agenda and what those learning outcomes look like because we have a skills framework that we feed off of, right? So it all links together. So now all of our engineering and product training and all of that, all of those are now linked to our skills framework. So if someone finds themselves at a lower level, they can now take a course that we know will absolutely upskill them to the level that we expect. So it's something pretty exciting on our front. And we are finding that people are loving it. Our engineers are very enthusiastic about this because this is the first time that they've ever had this roadmap, which really speaks to what Josh was speaking about with that motivation factor.
Got it. And I guess
a question.
Yes.
Yes.
So I completely salute you around creating a skills framework like that. That's really clear about, in order to achieve this, you need to develop these knowledge and capabilities so people can assess, so you can assess the gap between their current state and their desired state, and then make recommendations about what kind of learning experiences have the highest probability of supporting them to get from their current state to their desired state. So that's great. I guess my question is, I was interested that you said that you give these skill taxonomies, if you will, to the employees and ask them to self-assess. I guess I'm curious, how good are they? How accurate are they at self-assessing? And how do you know?
Yeah, so we don't actually know initially. However, in our pilot that we ran a little over a year ago, we found that when they took the self-assessment, they wanted someone else to assess them on the same skills. And so we are giving people the opportunity to have others around them, if they so choose, to evaluate them to see if they level off. We don't want to force that at this point because skill levels are so personal, right? We want people to feel safe in taking those self-assessments, but we're giving them the tools to be able to have those deeper conversations with other people to say, hey, do you think I'm really at this skill level? And that becomes a very detailed conversation about something that they've never talked about before. So we're encouraging those conversations, but we're not forcing them at this point. So we won't have any data initially. We're just trying to make this a safe space for people to get used to this concept, because we really do believe that it will take off once people start really exercising those muscles that they've never exercised before.
I mean,
if I can, sorry, Candace, you go.
I agree with you completely around creating a safe space for learning, because the social facilitation, social inhibition research would say that if people are being observed while they're learning, they're going to start behaving differently than if they're not.
Absolutely.
And actually less effectively for the learning. So that's one of the things that I think is really important for all of us to think about, is as we're collecting the data from learner actions, to be able to model those so we can support the learner best. How do we assure that learner that that data that we're collecting and the inferences we're making about their learning state are just to support their learning and aren't going to be used for other sort of evaluation or performance purposes? So I think one of the things that'd be interesting to work on is and at the same time as the learning research, I want to maximize the sharing of that data for the purposes of building everyone's better understanding about how learning happens. So this idea of creating guidelines for the responsible use of learner data, where we are sort of maximizing the sharing of the data for the purposes of supporting the learner, or for building our fundamental understanding of human learning, or for improving the learning experience, but essentially not sharing the data in a personal way or identifiable way, so that we can keep that safe space for learning to happen.
Right. And that's one of the reasons that we're not revealing any of this data to anyone. The learner themselves can reveal it to whoever they wish, but we will not be doing that for them.
See, I actually think that's often been, I think it's wonderful that you're not revealing the data to anyone, but once everyone knows that data exists, to say to the learner, it's your choice whether you share it or not, is that really a real choice? Because let's say I'm trying to go for some kind of new role at Expedia, and that new manager says, oh, well, do you have this set of skills? Have you been evaluated? And they'll go, yeah, but that's my data. I don't really want to share it. Okay, then you're not even in the pool, you know?
Right.
So I think that that's often been suggested, that the way to protect learner data is to be very clear that the learner owns their own data and gets to make choices about with whom or with what it's shared. But I think that's actually a false sense of, I think that's a false power. Because when systems develop where it's like, no, we know that data exists, and if you don't want to share it, you just don't, you're not even in the applicant pool, then people don't really have the choice about whether to share it or not.
Right. Yeah. And I think that that's where we're kind of in our infancy at this point, right? So we are just now beginning to gather the data. People are just beginning to use it. And we have been talking about the use of that data and what that means. So points very well taken, Candace. And it's definitely something that's absolutely on our radar to be very, very careful of, because our communications out to the managers is this is not for evaluation purposes. This is strictly for development purposes. And that really is a very strong message that has to be very well communicated. And if we start seeing that kind of behavior, we have to, kind of really have a conversation with that manager very quickly. To get that kind of behavior stopped. So yeah, no, absolutely. Points very, very well taken.
That's great. I'm sorry. I stepped on you because I wanted to ask the other question. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask this question around there's certainly the importance of safeguarding the privacy and learner data and trying to sort of make it more efficient and most efficient for the learner. But does this at times, I guess this is great for organizations which have made the leap and commitment towards saying like, hey, we are committed towards workforce development. But for some of the organizations which are in the process of thinking about it, just not having maybe measures or ways to be able to track the effectiveness of deploying dollars or spending money towards it, does that act as a hurdle at times for people saying like, if we're not going to be able to sort of see tangible results or actionable data for this, how do we sort of make the commitment towards spending management time, towards spending dollars towards it? And maybe, especially, I guess, Julia and Kat, you guys are probably both at Coursera as well as Degreed wrestling with this problem all the time. So it'd be great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I actually just had an entrepreneur recently who's selling a fantastic product into the enterprise, a learning product into enterprises. And one of the questions that he was getting from VCs as he was trying to raise money was whether this was a nice to have product or a need to have product. And, in my mind, it's like, this is a must have product. Like, how are companies going to be able to thrive if we don't have amazing learning solutions to upskill them? But the challenge has been, and why it's been in this not need to have, but nice to have bucket, is because the metrics haven't been there to justify the learning spend and justify the impact that learning is having. So I think having that data is incredibly important for justifying it, as well as for figuring out which learning products are working and which ones aren't. I was working with one company based in France who had over 70 different learning providers that they were using as solutions, digital learning providers with their employees. They need to know which ones work and which ones maybe they should pass on, and that's where data becomes incredibly important.
Yeah, data. You could share data for evaluating the product without evaluating the individual. That's the distinction.
Yeah, and I think you speak to it, right? The individual. We talk about data and we talk about serving the individual. Like the the data is to understand. We talk about personalization. Well, how do you personalize? You have to understand who that person is. And so as we come to an understanding around this individual, how they represent themselves and their abilities, where their manager says they have gaps, like those are points of data for us to understand and better serve them. And I think when it comes to that data and that personalization, the transparency and how that is being applied for them is really what's at the heart of it. If we do things with their interactions, if we do these things and we break a trust, if we break a pact with that user in order to better serve them, it's going to throw them off, right? So instead, we have to be very clear. Here is why we are asking for this. Here is the benefit for you, also that we can better serve them. And as we talk to so many organizations, I love this conversation because it happens across the board, but we can't let perfect be the enemy of progress. And often, especially when it comes to capabilities and skill and ratings, we want to have all of the answers. Well, then we won't ever get anything done. And so I would say, like, self-rating, awesome, because that's a point of information that we might not have had before if we were trying to design the perfect assessment. Instead, it's just, how can we better understand? If we seek first to understand, then to talk about the applications, we'll be much further along, not just in our organizations, but as a global, globe, as humans.
If I can add to what you're saying, Kat, and really, building on what's been said, I agree that the learner needs to be in control of their data, and that's critical. At the same time, I think what was implied in the question that was asked is, well, how good are learners, at really figuring this stuff out on their own? Mm-hmm. And people don't know what they don't know, and particularly in the context that careers are changing so fast, so rapidly. How many people do we know who have great design backgrounds who have never heard of UX or UI? So there's a real opportunity here to use data to better inform the opportunities that people have. So if an accountant knew that there was a high correlation between their skill set and those of a cybersecurity professional, then that would be extremely valuable for that individual. And it brings to the surface this concept of career corridors. And really that is based on requiring a really sound skills framework, as Rebecca mentioned. This is the foundation of it. It also requires, I think the other element is, you want to be strategy-led in your approach here. And so from a company perspective, having an idea of what are the impacts of technology on my business and where is my business heading, and therefore what skills do I need to invest in and what skills do I have maybe that will no longer be relevant for, going forward. What you want to do in that situation is avoid what a very large Australian bank did, where they went out to the market and announced, look, we're going to have to fire 6,000 people because they've got the wrong skills. And then we're going to have to go and hire 2,000 people because they've got the right skills. What was sort of there but not said was that it would be impossible to hire those 2,000 people in such a small market because they don't exist. There's horrendous skill shortages there. And actually, if they'd done a bit more digging using some kind of skills framework, they probably would have realized that there's probably a good 1,000 or so of those 6,000 people that could have transitioned with some very targeted skill-based training to then take, some of those available roles. And that would have been far better for the organization, far better for the employee on every level. So, the impact of data is extremely powerful. SEEK is certainly investing in that as an asset. Other organizations like Fathom, obviously, and Burning Glass and others. And the more that we can invest in that data to start to connect the dots and provide options for individuals to expand their horizons and their point of view, I think the more we'll be in good shape.
And if I could piggyback, oops, sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say
Sorry, go for it, Julie. I was just going to say we are very close to the end of our time slot, and so I think I just wanted to highlight that to you guys. But of course, definitely do go on, and I wanted to hear your perspective on this stuff.
Oh no, just a very quick case study in terms of what you're talking about. AT&T has done a really amazing job of mapping out the skills, and then you can, as an employee, you can log on and you can actually see whether your job is on the incline or on the decline. And then if it's on the decline, you can see what other jobs are available, and then a set of learning opportunities you can take advantage of that are aligned to those new jobs. Something though that I'm one of the reasons I'm really interested in Candace's work though is I think in some ways that only gets us so far. Like we know that people have a hard time prioritizing things that are in the long term. And, reskilling is a really hard, very long-term effort. And so even if you know that at the end of it, you have this job that's really amazing, you have so many very immediate moments, in between then in which you're making a choice between something very immediate in the present or, your studies. And so one of the things that I'm very interested in from an investment standpoint and from looking at new ventures is the role of behavioral science in mitigating some of these like very human factors that might be impacting workforce development.
Just at the risk of going a little bit over, I did want to ask maybe one last quick question for all of you, which is if you guys think about the opportunities and the challenges within this space, what would you put as key near-term opportunities where you see things improving and things are improving already, as you go year to year? And what do you put as some of the longer-term challenges where maybe these require either behavioral changes, these just require, these are large opportunities, but much longer-term challenges? Anybody?
I can have a quick go. One of the near-term challenges, I think actually this panel highlights it. Isn't it incredible that, we have individuals here from Expedia, organizations like Expedia and Amazon, who are so deep into the education, the science of learning and the science of education, including people with great, Candace has a background from Stanford University. So we're seeing this real mixing going on. And Julia, has a background from Coursera, where, Coursera is doing a great job in bringing companies and universities together. And so I think there's a real opportunity around co-curriculum development between universities and industry. And that's a clear near-term opportunity. Immediately, it would be so much more valuable for the world if a lot of the great stuff that's happening inside Amazon and Expedia was exposed to people outside. It would be good for individuals. It would be clearly good as a talent pipeline development opportunity and as a brand building and sort of ecosystem building exercise. And that's happening, but more of it would be great.
Yeah, I would say it's not only I sort of salute your suggestion, Josh, and I would say it's not only co-curricular building, but co-science building. That there are, we haven't even briefly touched on all the different sciences that support the science of human learning. And so leveraging, having good partnerships between institutions that have large populations that need to support upskilling, and with various researchers who are going deep in things like how does identity interact with context to support someone or inhibit someone from learning. And I mean, I could just rattle off tons of really interesting research areas that a lot of companies have what researchers need, which is a big N to be able to do these rapid experimentation and benefit everybody, as Josh pointed out. So I would say, yeah, co-curricular development, but that's just a tiny piece of it. It's really collaborating on the science.
Just to echo that, I mean, I think, what if we think of companies as this fourth education institution, and what does that look like? And it probably doesn't look like traditional higher ed. Like there's a whole set of new opportunities that open up when somebody is learning and working at the same time, and there's a pipeline for advancement right there. So I think we're just starting to imagine what the possibilities are, and I'm really excited about that.
So in our short-term vision, I would say for our existing employees who are, say, veteran engineers, we want to give them the opportunity to see what other skills they could build out, right? So we're not just showing them what a software engineer skill set looks like. We're showing them machine learning engineering. We're showing them data science, and we're letting them make choices. Is this something that I want to go into? Is it because in the skills framework they have, here is a list of tasks that I'm going to be able to do at these particular levels. And so when you allow that to happen, that's allowing them to really grow and expand, right? And really bringing in that intrinsic motivation. And then for our newer hires coming in, giving them, like I had said before, kind of a roadmap of what they can do to upskill themselves. It's no longer a mystery, right? So it's been a mystery for so long. Oh, well, I want to, be a better developer. Well, what does that mean? Right. And so we're giving them that definition so that they can continue. So that's definitely in the short term. And then the long term for us, I think, is just simply keeping up with the technology. Our company is rapidly changing the technologies that we use to get better and better and better. And so for us, just keeping up with that demand, that is something that I think is really key to, like what Josh was saying, that co-curricular design. Oh my goodness, there's so many possibilities there, right? And how we can grow that and there's some vendors, by the way, that do this very well by allowing kind of open sourcing of this content, right? And just all the newest stuff. Oh, I just learned, I went to a seminar on this and I'm going to build a class on this. That's fantastic. We need more of that. So, and kind of fostering that too.
I'll just close out really quickly with, as long-term view is always where my mind goes, and it relates actually to the short term. Hearing what Expedia has done, I wish all organizations looked like that. You had a roadmap, there was transparency for the individual. They knew where they needed to go. Because at the end of the day, jobs, it's a marketplace. Do I have the skills necessary to meet the demand of the business? And how can I continually close that gap through upskilling myself? Well, often the demand for my skills is not transparent. And the way that work happens now is evolving very quickly. It is no longer defined cleanly. And here is your job. Here's what you're going to be doing. No, it's messy. It's dynamic. It's evolving. And so the future in giving that transparency, it's also our biggest challenge. We need to understand before we can make transparent. And so excited, to hear this group making so much progress to that end, and also just the collaboration that we see across companies, with those cross curriculums, but also across platforms, technologies working together in order to provide that transparency.
This has certainly been very interesting. I think personally I can say it's been a very engaging discussion. I do want to thank all of you for joining today. Hopefully, I would say this is all also given everybody who's attending a little bit more food for thought and a little bit, hopefully, of motivation to continue to grow maybe our own skill sets as well across time. But this is very helpful.